Still on the search of that one true love? On the limbo in this crazy world of dating, marriage, relationships? Well, listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Relationship Podcast, your one-stop podcast for everything about relationships.
Well, hello, and welcome to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I'm your host, John Johnson, and in this particular podcast episode, I'm going to be talking about self-help, or helping yourself. Dealing with things such as fears, what's failure, peer pressure, something like that. If you were to walk into a bookstore and were to look at the self-help section, you're going to be seeing a lot of things on the topic of how to deal with you mentally and emotionally. And it's an area of the bookstore that many people frequent. Some people are able to get a lot of use out of that section and a lot of useful knowledge. And some people pass it right by. You may have never thought of stopping and saying what's there. But there's a lot of conversation that can be had out of the self-help section. It's a topic for many hours of discussion, but I'm going to tackle it from a discussion to share with you on dealing with fears. Fears, what is that? That is something you're afraid of. That's just a simple, generic term. But here's a scenario. You have something in a way of a presentation that you need to make, and in that presentation, your topic is whatever it is. The preparing the topic isn't difficult for you because you're probably an expert at it. But the thing that you now have to do is you have to make that presentation in front of lots of people. You have a difficulty doing that because you are afraid. That is a very realistic fear. Public speaking ranks right up there with one of the number one fears that every human being has. Now, is there a book in the self-help section to deal with that? There certainly is. In fact, you can probably watch videos on how to prepare yourself. And, there's the old adage that said, well, okay, if you're standing in front of a group of people, pick them all naked, and that sort of gives you this image of feeling maybe that you're not as vulnerable as they are. But it's the whole vulnerability thing in the fear equation is what stops people, and it's what makes it difficult for you to get past. And it's understanding what might be the root cause of that fear, whether humiliation, embarrassment, fear of failure, all of these things can play into that. But it's what it does to you and how you relate to yourself and how it stops you in life is the thing that I'm going to cover in the moment. And how do you get around that? Well, one of the things that we do when you're in therapy is we try to get at the root cause. What may have caused you that fear? Did something happen to you a long time ago and you were embarrassed and it just left an imprint on you that stops you now from wanting to go forward and ever do anything like that again? Because it's in those kinds of moments where you lose opportunities, because as you run this thing out into the future and think about how many things you don't participate in because you have this fear of presenting something in the way of your ideas. That way the world doesn't even get to know who you are. We don't get to hear you or the gift of your thoughts, your knowledge presented to us. And I want to say that in all respects when I say the gift, because there are many, many creative people that we don't know anything about because of their fear of presenting. And if we can get you beyond that, you can blossom. And the esteem, the self-esteem, the lift that happens when you're able to express yourself, to be heard, to be seen, is phenomenal in terms of helping a person grow. And if you're that individual that's experiencing this, dealing with the fear is what's going to help you get past it. The interesting irony is, and it's been said, it's a saying, I don't have the statistics to back it, but say 90 95 to 98% of what we fear never really happens. It's just an idea in our head. And whether it's making a presentation in front of a bunch of people and feeling ridiculed, I mean, I'm sure we've all seen it, and where somebody has done something and it's quite funny, quite laughable, and we laugh at them. I think what might play in our heads is now we are the ones who are up there, and we stand to become the person that's ridiculed, so you kind of feel that you might be getting back what you did to someone else. That's a fear, because people realize that they do things that are not nice to someone, and they feel like maybe they're going to get their comeuppance, or karma is going to come back, or you reap what you sow. All of those expressions represent there. And when you go through life seeing things through that, I'm going to term it this way, like that fear-based filter, it stops you. Now, as I started to share, when you're dealing with it on a therapy level, one of the things that happens is we begin to try to figure out if there's something that happened ages ago that's just playing in your subconscious that stops you from being able to experience that new thing. And when we find out what it is, a lot of times we take it apart and we show how sometimes it's probably an irrational fear. It's probably something that we created. If it's something that did happen and you had a bad experience with it, it may have been because the first time out you try something, sometimes it doesn't work out so well. Some people might luck up and have a great first experience, and it sort of encourages them to go on. But if you didn't have that great first experience, then you feel really stumbled and stifled. You might not want to try it again, because being laughed at obviously is no fun. I mean, if you have a sense of humor, you can take the ribbing. That's great. You probably have a strong enough self-esteem that you can handle that. But not a lot of people are there. A lot of people are somewhere in the middle to low, and they're afraid of failure, because we tend to make a big deal out of success. But we need to make a bigger deal out of failure, because by failing and learning from failure, then you can eventually have success. And that's a philosophy, but that's how I've experienced life. And many people I know who have been successful have said that very same thing. And it's about having the fortitude to pursue. So I've talked about a little bit of fear, and I've just touched on a little bit about what failure is. Now, I'm going to transition to something else. I'm going to talk about peer pressure. Peer pressure is that which is coming from outside yourself, and people have an incredible amount of power over us. There are many people that are in our sphere of influence, or we are in their sphere of influence, to say it that way, and they make a big impression upon us. Either we want to please them, or we like being in their experience. But to be like them, to be like that group, whether if you're a young person listening to this podcast and you have friends around you and they're doing things that you wish that you could do, or you have some sort of little initiation that you have to go through, and if you're older, let's say you're a college person, and there are these rituals that we have to go through in order to be like the group. All of that's peer pressure. And how we respond to peer pressure obviously says a lot about our character. And there are things in terms of peer pressure which we can look upon as being good experiences and helpful to us, and there are things that are not helpful. So let me give you an example of a good, helpful one. Peer pressure. All the kids tend to line up in line, and they're quiet, and they do the thing that they've been instructed to do, and you have one person that just wants to misbehave. Now, the peer pressure of looking at that one and saying you need to toe the line and be like the rest of us so that everybody has a good experience, that's a good example of peer pressure, because we're taking the one individual who is creating a disruption, and we're letting them know that that's not okay. That's a good example of peer pressure. A bad example is when you have, and we're all familiar with these types, because this is what then obviously sometimes, this is what sometimes can lead to bullying, and it's where somebody doesn't want to conform to everything else that's going on. It may be counter to their culture. It may be counter to their belief about what's right and wrong. And here's an example: peer pressure to try drugs, illegal drugs. A lot of kids are strong enough to not have that happen, meaning if somebody would tempt them and they will say no. And there are some who aren't strong enough to be able to resist that. And the peer pressure to try things that are risky is pretty high. So if you're listening and you fall into that category, understand that that's peer pressure. And if it doesn't represent you and who you are and your values, it is okay to say no. And the thing to do is, if you're experiencing peer pressure and it might even become bullying, is you need to speak out. And there are people and organizations that are out there that want to support you. As far as bullying, you can go on the internet and look up bullying. There is so much that is going on. And if you're a young person and you're in a school situation, there are counselors, teachers, principals. They're there to help you. If you're an adult and you're experiencing this sort of thing, you're kind of in a different realm here. This may be a legal matter. You may need to be contacting the police about your safety, because in general, adults are expected to be able to handle their matters in a little different way. You have different resources. Life's experience is there to teach you how to handle that. But understand that there may be peer pressure in the works here, but never let it drag you into something that is not healthy for you. So that sort of brings me to the topic of being an individual and how significant that is. As a person, it's that you are here on this earth to experience your life, however that is. And you are an individual. You're not a carbon copy of anyone else. And that's the gift of you in your existence, is you get to be yourself. And there are many things out there to try, whether it's skydiving, climbing trees, climbing rocks, riding bicycles, taking walks, being a mentor to someone else. There's just a whole range of things, and you have your life to figure those out. And in essence, you are helping yourself. That's the beauty of this. You kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about here. It's in doing things like this where you have the power to control over your individual happiness. And that is dealing with your fears, understanding what is failure, being fearless, learning to love yourself. Give yourself permission to embrace you and the essence of who you are. That's how you get better at life. When you understand yourself, understand what you like and what you don't like, that is so powerful, because then when you bring that to the equation of when you finally meet other people and are in the experience of them, you're vibrant and alive. You have something to contribute, and they love that. They'll invite you, and then you no longer have to be afraid of standing in front of that crowd, because you'll have all that charisma, and they'll be watching you, and you probably won't even know it. So how's that for taking it on? I'm going to take a short break, and we'll be right back after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hello and welcome back to Golden State Media Concepts Relationships Podcast. I am John Johnson, and I want to talk about the value of friendship. It is something that is sometimes it's hard to put into words. There are lots of songs that have been written about love and relationships and friendships and so on and so forth. It's a beautiful thing. And in friendship, and I'll talk about that in contrast to romantic relationships, because I just want to give some enlightenment there. Romantic relationships have a component to it where there's the interdependence on one another, and there's the romance. And there's the friendships are different because obviously there's emotion there. There's a bond, but friendships operate on a different level. And friends can agree or not disagree without necessarily the same ramifications that if you're in a partnership with a lover. Disagreeing with them may have some heavy consequences because it's the livability of some of those situations. But friends can decide if they want to both go to a baseball game, and if they both don't want to go, somebody can say no, and someone doesn't have to necessarily feel hurt or left out. And the beauty of the freedom and being a friend with somebody also comes with some responsibility. You learn things about your friends that they can tell you in confidence. And friends, the beauty of that is you learn it, but you can also be very instrumental in being a confidant and sharing valuable information, valuable insight. And I think that's what's nice about friends, is that you can have lots of them. You can only have one primary relationship, at least in the culture where I'm from and where I speak from. You have one primary relationship, but you can have lots of friends. And with that, you get this body of knowledge. I mean, you can't know everything yourself. But if you have friends, they're people that you can consult, you can ask questions, you can propose things and get honest feedback. And that's invaluable. That's part of the richness of life. You just can't beat that. So if you have friendship, and certainly cherish your friends, while they're around, and tell them that you love them, that you care about them. And I certainly couldn't be without my friends. I appreciate them. They have been there to support me through thick and thin. And for what it is, when you've lived long enough and you've had valuable friends for a long time, it certainly means something to you. So, just a little bit of philosophy there. I got asked something the other day, and it has to do with men and commitment. I know this comes up all the time because there is a perception that men do not want to commit, and I can certainly tell you that is not the case. I think men are very interested in committing. I think what happens is that men are oftentimes become afraid of committing to something that they don't quite understand, and certainly men have their relationship. How do you want to call it? Their misconceptions about relationships and about what women want. Oftentimes men think that what women want is just somebody who's a stud in bed and a guy with a lot of money. And guys oftentimes realize that they don't meet that criteria, but they feel lucky to have had a date, and so they constantly are on the hunt. Well, what I can tell you is men have oftentimes carried these perceptions of things because that's what they see in the media, that's what they see portrayed, and oftentimes they hear gossip. Well, what I can tell you that men are capable of doing is they're very capable of committing. Once they see the in and of themselves, and this sometimes has to do with an esteem issue, that they are valuable and that they have something to contribute, and that it is not about the size of their member, but it has to do with the size of their character. See, this changes men's perception about what's important. And when we see that development, oftentimes it happens for men much later in life than for women. Women tend to have the instinct to want to be committed to something much sooner than guys do, because guys find themselves interested in trying on things. And by trying on, it's the idea that they don't necessarily learn from reading a book, and they could take advice from other guys, but it doesn't necessarily equate to having the experience. And when you experience a woman, and every woman is different, but when a guy experiences a woman and then has a positive relationship experience with that, then he wants to replicate that. And sometimes, unfortunately, sometimes this may mean that the guy is going to try another woman to see if he replicates this. And what's really happening is he might think that he's the architect of this. And what he's learning is that every woman is different. And he's only going to have that particular experience with that particular individual. And as he learns that aspect of being around a woman, then he learns to be selective. Because as young men, you understand what it's like when a woman gets upset. And you understand what it's like to please a woman. And sometimes they, because of the attention thing, they think, okay, well, I can just show up. This is the guy thinking, I can just show up and she's going to be happy. Well, what they tend to find out is that there's lots of competition. So then guys may seemingly become competitive with each other in order to have that experience with that one woman. And then they may find out, okay, it's, again, a very individual thing. Just like guys are very much individuals and how they think. But as you pull all of this together, it's as men mature, they begin to figure these things out. And I'm talking, guys tend to start maturing in their like 20s, early 30s, and hopefully they're really learning from it. Sometimes, and I've seen this happen too, guys don't wise up until they get into their 40s. And that's because they have done enough of the horsing around and clowning around, and have picked a lot of women who would do that as well. And then they find themselves left because they really start making the big mistakes in life. That's, the drug abuse, that's the alcohol abuse kind of thing, the lying about money, the all of the negatives in life that they realize that they can't cover up, because people finally wise up and they can see that about them, and they find out that they're going to be out on their own. So then men tend to shape up. That not all of them. I am talking about a few though, because the guys know that they're out there. But for women listening to this, you know what I'm talking about. And men tend to want to believe that they can fix whatever is wrong, and even if it's themselves. And by believing that, they figure they can always rescue a situation. Well, what happens is they probably keep hitting their head on that rock time and time and time again. And then they finally figure out, oh, I'm not doing so good at this. And they start to listen, whether it's to the pastor or their dad or big brother, or maybe, the one that they're trying to be in a relationship with. And it corrects their behavior. But it takes a while. But again, I'm commenting on this because I'd been asked to, and I thought it was relevant. One more thing on that, and this goes for either way. Look, if you're encountering somebody who is just downright irresponsible and just can't get their act together, you don't have to make it your cause to fix them. If you want to give them a piece of advice, point them in the right direction, do it tactfully. But it is not your job in life to fix somebody else, because when you buy into a fixer-upper, you're buying a lot of problems. People are oftentimes at their station in life because of the choices they've made. And if they want to have a better outcome, then they have to be on that path themselves. And there's plenty of opportunities out there for them to change the direction that they're going. Or the trajectory that they're headed on, if they want to pay attention. So you don't necessarily have to make it your mission to fix somebody, but take care of yourself. And that goes for either sex, man or woman. Well, I want to thank you for listening, and I'm going to wrap up this episode saying this is John Johnson with Golden State Media Concepts, and we'll catch you next time.